Alright, and welcome to Fortnite Story Sunday. This is episode 1. We're going to be going over the story for chapter 1. We're going to start it off right here and now. Actually, one thing I did want to say beforehand, this is not going to be a super extensive summary. A lot of things I want to mention that there are going to be more detail in chapter 2, because that's when we actually get confirmation and get more knowledge of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video. So we're going to start it off with Season 0. Season 0, obviously, that is when Fortnite came out. Obviously, it came out as Save the World originally, but throughout these first few seasons, we're not going to have a lot of information to go off of. A lot of it gets confirmed and, becomes fact and just gets built off of in Chapter 2, which is going to be a lot more extensive information and summaries. One thing with Save the World is VenderTech. That is a company in Save the World. I haven't played Save the World enough, so I don't know too much about it. We kind of know they built grenades and some other stuff, and I feel like they might be important to either the Imagined Order or the 7, which I will mention and go extensive in a later season of this video. Season 2 then comes around. That was Season 0 and Season 1. Season 2 comes around. It introduces the Battle Pass, which is also the introduction to snapshots, when we see the same character multiple times. I'm going to, again, talk more about that later on. Maybe in Chapter 2, I might talk a little bit at the end of this Chapter 1 video. But it's just, we just don't know much about it. But snapshots are pretty much the same character, like a snapshot. But then, more importantly, Season 3. Season 3 is where it really starts. At the end, there's not much story throughout Season 3, but it does end on a very high note, which is this mystery dot in the sky which everyone is curious about. Eventually, we learn what that mystery dot is. A mystery dot will be a comet. It slowly grew closer and closer, larger and larger, getting brighter in the sky, and just growing in size, eventually reaching the island, starting the true story of Fortnite at the beginning of Season 4. Season 4 launches the story for the Fortnite world. We started off with the comet that we eventually found out about at the end of last season has crashed onto the island. It has caused a massive divot at the middle of the map called Dusty Divot, which destroyed our beloved Dusty Depot. At the center of this, there's a pod and this meteorite-type shell encasing. Around that, there's actually a military base. Think of, in the original Thor for the MCU, just how they had this whole site around the hammer. It's almost exactly like that. This is the first site of our government, which we will learn about and talk about throughout Chapter 1. Eventually in Chapter 2, learning might be some kind of form of the Imagined Order, which again, we're going to talk about later on. In this season, we also have the visitor pod. That is what that casing capsule is in the meteorite. The visitor, which we will later learn, but I'm going to talk about now, is one of the members of the 7. That is his description, one of the members of the 7. We obviously didn't know more about that till later in the chapter, learning more about the members, and in Chapter 3, learning even more and getting the rest of the characters. Now we know all of the 7. Alongside this season, we actually had our first collaboration, which was the Thanos Infinity Gauntlet event. This opened the world, not just for Fortnite as a game, but in the story. A lot of these collaborations are actually canon and important to the story. So, this is where that really took off, which in the next season we're going to talk about, which is called Worlds Collide. We're going to talk a lot more about the multiverse. And then finally, this season had one of the first live events in gaming history, especially in Fortnite. The event was the rocket event. The visitor, who crashed, eventually built a rocket which traveled around the island, eventually exploding in the air. This rocket created what we call rift. This rift opened the world. to us. The world of Fortnite, the real world, and the multiverse, which, like I said, we're going to talk about in Season 5. But that would not have been possible without the Visitor creating the rocket and launching it, creating rifts, which is where our Fortnite story really took place and started to what we know it is today. Season 5. Worlds collide. That is where we get the introduction to the rifts, which are those things that you might have seen, space-themed. Here's one if I can find one. That's a rift. There's a huge one that's throughout the sky. That is what brought Drift and the Durburger here. This is where we get the introduction, the multiverse. I feel like that's the big part of Season 5, the multiverse. Drift and the Durburger were from our world, Earth, real life. But they were stolen and taken to the Fortnite world, where Drift, the character, lost his memories. Another big part about this season is Kevin. I think a lot of people in the Fortnite community and outside the Fortnite community know about Kevin the Cube. Kevin the Cube is a mascot for the Fortnite community, but also a key part of the lore. Eventually, later in Chapter 2, Season 8, he's going to come back stronger and better than ever and being a key part which actually introduces us to so many new and favorite characters of the Fortnite lore. At the end of this season, Kevin just kind of appeared one day. It was actually in the middle of a tournament. But at the end, he slowly, throughout the about second half of the season, he was rolling around the map. Eventually reaching Loot Lake, where he then kind of dissolved into the lake, which next season starts off with the formation of the Cube Island, which is where things escalate ever so farther, which is Darkness Rises. Season 6, Darkness Rising, opens up with one of the biggest map changes apart from the divot. This is not the exact island, but this is what the cube turned into. We start off the season with a cinematic where the cube slowly just floats out of the lake, taking the middle island with it, creating what you saw before you. Darkness Rising was around October, so the Halloween season. With this, we get the addition of zombies. I just want to quickly say this is partly theory, but I think with the fact that Vindertech does make grenades and stuff like that, it can totally be seen as fact, possibly that zombies in Save the World are the same. It is a multiverse, which we learn more about in Chapter 2 in the Marvel season, but we talked about that a little bit before last season with the rifts, that possibly Save the World is part of the Fortnite Battle Royale world as well, as they're just different, like, wavelengths, you know, like thinking like Flash, multiverse. Along with this season, we have runes. The cube is actually going around. I believe it might have done this last season, this season, but I think it fits more this season. Runes. The cube went around the map and created runes on the ground, which did different things. These runes will create an effect, a character in Chapter 2. I know I keep saying that. Chapter 2 is just where the story got polished. In Chapter 1, the story was rugged. They didn't really have it written out. They just kind of went with it. In Chapter 1, Season 6, we got the runes, which will create, like I was just saying, which will affect a character later on. His name is Raz. It's gonna really affect that. And like I said, as well last season, how the cubes are an entire season in Chapter 2. Chapter 2, Season 8, the cubed season. But this is where they really start to take off. There's not too much with the runes. However, other than they're doing different things, we don't really know the meaning or anything like that. But what I want to say with this season is the event. The event is kind of confusing, but also beautiful in its own remark. The event is the cube eventually went back, or I should say Cube Island, went back to the middle island. There, it exploded, causing the shards of the cube to then be shot out, not just in the middle of the island at Loot Lake, which it did. That is, it kind of did that in Chapter 2 as well, but in Chapter 1, it created a, just the parts of the cube were just sort of sitting there. That's what I remember when I started in Season 7, the season after this. Along with this, the event shot us into this rift zone, where we saw the rift butterfly. This is the first time, it's as it says, it is a butterfly made of rifts. Now, we don't really know what this means, but it is again important, again in Chapter 2. And later on in Season X, which I want to talk about later, and I might have a picture, we'll see, it has, it came back multiple times, and I think it might be a symbol and just symbolic for something. Let's see. But yeah, so but I think another thing that could have happened was, since it opened up this rift zone, the fragments of the cube could have been shot out not along just the map, but along reality. Later on, we see other characters from Chapter 1, from Chapter 2, and even Chapter 3 holding and possessing parts of Kevin the Cube. Even parts of Kevin, or Kevin as a whole, in Chapter 2 we see. Again, an important part is Raz. He comes along in, I believe it is Season 6 of Chapter 2. He has parts to the cube. Now, this is one theory, but totally can be seen, is the fact that when the cube exploded, it's almost like a nuke, right? It just has so much energy that it ripped apart the fabric of reality, which then inevitably opened portals all throughout the multiverse, shooting out the energy. One thing I'm going to talk about later on in next season with Ice King, and just later on in other seasons, is how possibly the energy of the cube, which can also be seen, which could have absorbed the energy of the 0 point, which we will talk about later on as well, which is what all of the Fortnite story is based off of. The cube and the 0 point, it could have been shot out from this explosion, which inevitably brought Galactus, could have brought the Ice King, and many other characters. That is more a theory than fact, but I definitely see it as a possible solution. But from that point, we're going to move on to Season 7. You better watch. Fortnite Chapter 1, Season 7. You better watch out. This is the winter season / Christmas season. It came out right after the Halloween, so obviously it's going to be in the spirits, but it's with a little bit of a twist. We did get Santa Claus, but it's more like a general of some kind of army. This army being the Ice King. Now, one theory that I personally have, again, not total fact, is that the Ice King came to the island to gather the 0 point / cube energy that was sent out. Along with Season 7, we get Polar Peak. In Polar Peak, there were some eggs. I don't got pictures for the eggs, but I got pictures for the creatures that came from the eggs, which we're later going to learn is the prisoner, or the Ice King's prisoner, the Fire King. We're going to see him a lot more in Season 8, and later in Season 7. The Fire King had 4 different styles. He had the chain version, which I still remember to this day logging on and seeing him just kind of frozen there. The prisoner. Frozen, like this block of ice with his arms chained. Slowly he got slightly chained, we can see his face. Then he started to get his fire back, and then most of his chains are burnt off, and he's completely on fire, as he's the Fire king. Now, the reason I want to say that is that, again, later on, one of the big characters for the end of Chapter 2 is the Cube Queen. And one of the members of the Seven, which we later learn, the origin, is the Cube King. So these are these elemental leaders and figures that have been kind of running the world for a while. We don't know what that means. These characters have not been in since then, but I definitely feel like they drove the story forward. Another thing about this season is ice zombies. They're back. The Ice King created zombies. Just pointing out that Save the World could mean something. That's really it for Season 7. Eventually we learn there's going to be something in the ice, but that's not going to be relevant until a whole season later in Season 9, till we learn what's in this ice, which is not the eggs. Like, the eggs are a dragon hybrid, which we'll see next season in X Marks the Spot. Season 8, Chapter 1, X Marks the Spot. We ended off last season with, like, these eggs, right? We sort of talked about that. Those, I just want to start off, at the beginning of the season, a volcano appeared. That is where the prisoner, the Ice King, Fire King, I should say, Fire King, stays. The Fire King has his own servants. Those are the hybrid. Those are what the eggs come from. These things. This season definitely ended with one of the biggest events biggest story events that not necessarily started the story, but helped us make sense of it. It's the event throughout the season. We had these sigil type things that we had to break, and as we broke them, they were slowly moved towards the center of the map, where eventually it would open up a vault that was unearthed. This vault was not at the Dusty Divot. That's still completely different. That's now, like, grown. This vault was actually at Loot Lake, which is where the cube was. The cube blew up, and that's where it was. Eventually we gotta open this vault, which sort of started a little bit of a question that I wonder if what this person does. Inside the vault, there's a desk with a helmet on it. Eventually, we saw that helmet a season later on another skin, which I'll show when we get to Season 9. But the big part of this event is in the back. It was the voting event. We actually got to vote for an item to come back. And behind this desk is actually the 0 point. It is the first time we've seen this thing. I don't really know what to call it. Still don't know, even in Chapter 3. But we saw this thing, and cool. So, and at the end, the volcano exploded, destroying Tilted, along with Retail Row. Now, another thing that I want to mention is we've seen the 0 point a whole bunch in Chapter 2. Even after this, in Season 9, we see it near the end in the event, and then we see it all throughout Season X. But most of those times it's broken or unstable. This is one of the only 2 times we've seen it stable. It's just there doing its thing. Looking at my notes to see if we need anything else. That's really the main parts of Season 8. But now we're getting much farther into the story. And after this point, that thing we kind of talked about last season that's in the ice is going to be revealed much more in the following season. Season 9, the future is yours. Fortnite Season 9, the future is yours. We're getting to the end of this. Bear with me. We're almost there. This is probably my favorite season of all of Fortnite, especially Chapter 1. The loot pool is great, you know, yeah, that's more game-wise, but story-wise, It was insane. Possibly my favorite, like my favorite of all time events. I loved the black hole. I loved the island flipping. We'll get to those. Don't worry. By the end of the series, but this is just possibly my favorite event. But that's near the end of the season. We got more stuff to talk about throughout the season. The monster I've been talking about, the thing inside the polar peak. Somewhere, I forget if it's in the beginning or middle of the season, we see an eyeball in the ice. Slowly, it broke out of the ice and started swimming around the island in the ocean. Eventually, sometimes coming onto the island, onto land, to feast because it was hungry. And it was roaming around. That is what Donald Mustard tweeted, roaming. Now, this monster was definitely a threat. It was gigantic. One of the main towers of Polar Peak was on its back, just chilling there. This thing was enormous. So, something had to be done. It had to be defeated. Because we knew it was going to devour the entire island. It's actually called the Devourer. So what happens is this government that we've talked about a few times, the Imagined Order, which is what we're going to call it, or Mystery Government, because the Imagined Order didn't exist until Chapter 2, this Mystery Government teamed up with Singularity. Now, later on, we learn that Singularity is the Paradigm, which is a skin, someone we meet next season, who is another member of the Seven. Obviously, at this time, we didn't know that. We still only had the Visitor, one of the 7 members. We had no idea who the rest are, or who the 7 are, and what their goal is. But Singularity teams up with the government to build a gigantic mech. Singularity is the pilot of the 7. Every member has a role. Visitor, I think sort of scouts it out. Paradigm would be the pilot. Or, I guess I should say Singularity at this time. Singularity is the pilot, and at the event, she will pilot the mech. In this, eventually a monster comes up, starts blasting everything, and the mech starts just going at it and just knocking it out with rockets. It's crazy. Now, eventually, we think the monster loses. It's thrown into the water. But then it comes out and rips off one of the arms of the mech. So what the mech does is, while it's crippled, it literally is missing a limb, it shatters the vault, punching the mech's fist into it, grabbing the 0 point. Now, if you remember Endgame, when Thanos takes one of the Power Stone out and just punches, I think it's Miss Marvel, it's kind of like that. Takes the 0 point and just knocks the monster out. Now, obviously, that's not enough to kill it, but it's enough to get it away for a minute. Then it goes over to Neo Tilted. And remember at the end of last season, Tilted Towers and Retail Row got destroyed? Well, in the new season, it was now Mega Mall and Neo Tilted. And in the middle of Neo Tilted, we had the statue of Singularity, which was actually a massive blade, which I also think was able to harness some of that extra energy absorbed by the 0 point, which was then shoved right through the Devourer's eye, killing it. So, the other thing I want to mention with this is it kind of, predicted the future. How did that happen? Well, another thing that was happening throughout the season was we were getting fort bites to unlock, and every time you got a fort bite, it's like this little computer type chip, it would unlock a larger loading screen and picture this. We obviously got this at the end of last season, but it was before the event, so we kind of knew what was going to happen. That's how we knew they were going to fight. Now, if he was making this at the beginning of the season before any of this happened, that's kind of confusing, isn't it? So Jonesy, while trapped, because from season 8 to 9 some time passed, and that he was trapped in the volcano, he obviously was going, crazy, or something, but he was able to read and understand what was going to happen in the future. He was able to predict the future. But So obviously, and not only that, he also knew some of the past and just other parts of the story. You can go back and freeze that and just look at that if you like. But I think where the season ends, after that, obviously the monster is destroyed. That's great. Then the mech flies off, and we don't see that till Chapter 2, Season 2. Chapter 3, Season 2, I should say. But it left this huge problem. Massive problem. The 0 point was now in the open. And it was unstable. It was cracked. It was damaged. Which makes the whole conflict of Season X out of time. Fortnite Season X out of time. We've reached the end. This is the last season of Chapter 1. And possibly, I don't really know how to describe the event, but we'll get there. We got so much information for this season. So, first off, I want to start off with the cinematic. We start off with Jonesy flying through this rift, seeing lots of different things throughout the chapter. We see things like the rocket from Season 4. We're seeing POIs. We're seeing new weapons that haven't existed before. But we're also seeing the Battle Pass skins for this season. And I want to point that out because all the Battle Pass skins are remakes. Now, you can look at that and say, oh, well, they're popular skins, but that's where we see snapshots. Because in this season, we learn about the loop. Okay. Batman's also here. I think there's some Batman comics, but we could talk about when those are more important in Chapter 2, or I might just make a smaller video to go up later in the week, just quick, like 5 minutes on the Batman comic summary. But we're seeing all these things in this other dimension, along with the Rift Butterfly yet again. Just want to mention that, because like I said before, I feel like it's going to be symbolic, because this is not the last time we are going to see the Rift Butterfly in the Fortnite world. Now, something that happened was the meteor came back, but didn't hit. The island actually went back in time before the meteor hit, and the meteor froze. The fractured 0 point, which created the first rift zone, which is just a section of the map that has a unique property that either, like the 0 point, has no gravity, or completely makes you go back in time, like Tilted Towers or Tilted Town or Tilted Towers or Neo Tilted went back in time to Tilted Town, which is like this cowboy western era, and you can't build. It went back in time. Just like the season says, it's sort of about time travel. So it freezes, it's changing. But later in the season, we get the secret skin. The scientist. This guy. This is the second confirmed member of the 7. Now, just like how I said Singularity is the pilot, I feel like this guy's name makes sense. He is the scientist. He is trying to do scientific research and make contraptions. He's the inventor. The scientist really gives us a lot of information for this season. Let's see. First off, we learn that he doesn't remember who he is. What I mean by that is, throughout the season, we're getting challenges, which are cassette tapes. They're primitive, and he's talking to himself in that, and he gets very confused. It's like, I, you, or he's like, and you must, no, I must. He's talking to himself because he might forget. This is where we talk about the loop for the first time. The loop is every Fortnite game. Every Fortnite game is the same, but on repeat. So everyone dies, the game goes on, and when the storm closes to the final point on the last man standing, it will repeat. You're gonna go back. But the reason the skins do this over and over is because they also forget. They have amnesia. So he's also gonna. That's why he's got to give himself these cassette tapes. But he's also concerned about being muted. We've never heard a character speak before, and that's another power of the loop, which is created by the 0 point to protect itself. It is a survival instinct. The 0 point created all realities. That's what reality came from. So that's what the Marvel universe, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that came from the 0 point, technically. All of the video game universes, that came. This is from reality 0. This is where everything came from. So, the 0 point obviously is scared. It's been targeted already, and now it's in like this state of panic. Thus, the Rift Zones is going crazy, like it's just trying to protect itself in whatever manner it can. But one thing that it's always done was the loop, which will mute and give amnesia. Now, later on, we're going to learn that you actually can escape the loop. I believe Batman does this, because in the season we also get Tilted Town later becomes Gotham City. So we got some Batman collabs. And I believe there were some comics, and like I said earlier, but I believe in these comics he's actually able to escape. We learn that the winner, the first person who makes it to the last, can actually escape the loop. But that's only if you are self-aware. Most of these guys aren't, because they're snapshots, they're not real, but these guys come from a different reality, so they kind of still have their memories intact for now. Now, there's some other things the scientist talks about, such as the bridge. Later we learn what the bridge is in the event that ended Chapter 2. But obviously we didn't know that at this time. So what was the bridge? Well, later we learned the bridge is what's like underneath the island. It's kind of like where the 0 point was at the event of Season 8. It's this area where these other people monitor the island. These other people, which is literally what the scientist says. He asks the question, someone else is watching. Who are they? Later we're going to learn it's the Imagined Order. That is the enemy of the 7. The whole story of Chapter 2 is the 7 versus the Imagined Order. Now, we already have 2 members, which at the time we knew we had 2 members, which now we know we have 3 members of the 7. We didn't know the Imagined Order at all. We learned a lot of the members in Chapter 2. But here's an agent, if I could find one. I'm not sure. We'll definitely be able to find some and show them in Chapter 2. So this is really where we get the start of the main conflict. Think Avengers, right? Like Loki doing stuff that's kind of like the volcano and fighting off zombies and this and that. But in the Avengers, what did Loki's army come from? Thanos. That was the main villain. That's exactly what's happening here. We've had all these smaller conflicts that came from the main conflict and enemy, which is the Imagined Order. Now, the event, it was large. It broke the internet. The event was, throughout the season, these rift zones are all around the map, and the scientist built another rocket. Now, this rocket actually had a lot of mini rockets going along with it. The rockets slowly started traveling and just teleporting all over in these different rifts. Eventually, the main rocket, eventually teleporting the meteor higher up. Then, all of a sudden, all of the meteors above the 0 point, all the rockets are spiraling around, just harnessing their energy and exploding in the 0 point, but also bringing the meteor down, eventually hitting the 0 point. Which, after going down yet again, it teleports to the sky, and all the rockets and the meteor slowly are falling down, hitting the 0 point. causing a massive explosion. This explosion is so massive it breaks the fabric of reality. This explosion actually creates a black hole, sucking the entire island in, along with all the characters. The scientist did lose his memory, I believe, for some time. I don't know if he got saved or what exactly the deal is with him. But everything's gone. And for 2 to 3 real-life days, it's just silence. And that is the end of Chapter 1. Which, at the beginning of Chapter 2, is a whole new world.